Did you know that the most recent studies show that up to 40% of all cancers are due to lifestyle factors? 40%! To help us understand what's going on with this and how you can lower your risk factors for cancer, we have one of the top experts in the field with us here today. So I'm here again with Dr. Nate Handley, who's board certified in medical oncology and integrative medicine, and is one of a few integrative oncologists in the country. Dr. Handley, welcome.
Thanks, Dr. Monty. Happy to be here.
So Dr. Handley, we're hearing more and more that there's a direct correlation between lifestyle and cancer. Help us to understand that a little more.
So we're increasingly finding that lifestyle factors play out a huge role in cancer. And in fact, some recent studies have suggested that 40% of cancers may be related to lifestyle factors.
40%?
40%. This is a huge number.
That's almost half the cancers out there could be attributed to lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. And so what does this mean? What does lifestyle mean? So this means things like diet, physical activity, obesity, metabolic health, things like diabetes and high blood pressure and cardiovascular things. All of these can increase your risk of cancer. And so in the modern world, where we eat a standard American diet, for example, which is a diet that is high in inflammatory foods, we're increasingly finding that these things actually have quite direct links to cancer. And many cancers like breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, all of the main causes of cancer are ones that we can ultimately link back to modifiable lifestyle factors.
So are our cancer rates in the United States higher than in some countries where they have a different kind of lifestyle?
So what we're finding is that developing countries and developed countries have increasingly high cancer rates. And sometimes when populations move from, like a different country to the US, their cancer rates start to increase. And so this is one of the reasons that we're beginning to understand that there is this real connection between lifestyle and cancer. And so there are a couple of reasons that this can happen. One of the real big lifestyle factors that drives cancer is obesity. And so when someone eats in a particular way or has a particular lifestyle, that can lead to someone being overweight. And what we're learning is that being overweight is not benign. When someone has excess fat, especially excess visceral fat, which is kind of fat around the inner organs and things like that, that fat's not just sitting there doing nothing. It's actually producing hormones. It's producing inflammatory markers that can lead to more inflammation in the body and that can then predispose someone to cancers. The other thing that it can do is that it can affect other hormones in our body. It can affect things like estrogen and testosterone. And there are several cancers that we know are related to specific types of estrogen, like breast cancer and endometrial cancer, for example. What we find is that certain lifestyles lead to increases in these problematic hormones, which is not to say that all hormones are bad and not to say that all estrogen is bad. But estrogen, when it's higher because of pro-inflammatory fat or because of diet and lifestyle things or because of exposure to toxins, which can also kind of lead to changes in hormones, all of those things can lead to increased cancer risk.
So an excess of body fat, it's not just an aesthetic thing. That excess fat actually becomes its own hormone system, its own endocrine system in a way that can really work against you.
It's almost like another organ in your body that is very much working against you. And one of the things that we often do is we kind of try to get a sense of where someone's fat is. And again, there are different types of fat. Not all fat is created equally, but this visceral fat, this kind of central fat, is the fat that tends to be the one that creates all these hormone problems.
One of the problems I often encounter is there's sometimes a resistance to talking about body weight and even a cultural thing of being careful not to body shame or fat shame in any way. How do you navigate that with your patients?
Well, I think it is an important and difficult conversation. And in reality, there are a lot of factors that lead to someone being overweight. It's not just about what you eat. It's about the entire environment in which someone exists. So physical activity is part of it. Diet and nutrition are part of it. But other things are part of it too. The other things in our life that we're exposed to. there are a lot of toxins, for example, that can lead to inflammation in the body and that can lead to excess body fat. And so there are many people who eat really well, try to eat very well, eat well, exercise a lot, and they still can't lose weight. And that's when we start to look for other factors that might be contributing. Things like there are certain pesticides and environmental contaminants that can affect your hormones. And so these might be food additives, they might be things that we encounter in cosmetic products and things like that. There's a shocking number of chemicals in our food supply and in our exposome, which is kind of all the things that our body is exposed to over the course of our lives, that can lead to changes, that can lead to increases in your weight.
What about the gut microbiome, and how does that interplay with weight and cancer risk?
As always, the microbiome is part of the equation here. If you remember anything, it's that the microbiome is a really big part of what is happening for our bodies. For every one cell in our body, there are 10 cells in our microbiome. And they're not just sitting around doing nothing. They're playing a really important role in actually affecting our hormones, affecting our inflammatory response to foods and things like that. They're helping break down foods. And what we increasingly know is that when the microbiome gets disrupted, our ability to fight cancer and to create a body that is resilient to cancer is also affected.
And what are the things that disrupt the gut microbiome?
So foods can be part of it. We think about fast food as a type of food that can be really inflammatory.
Because it's very processed, has a lot of bad fats and oils and those kinds of things.
Highly processed foods are things that we really want to avoid. And so having a diet that is minimally processed, full of kind of fresh vegetables, some fruits, minimally processed grains and things like that.
And why is that helpful to the gut microbiome?
Those diets provide the nutrients that the microbiome needs to thrive. And so the microbiome thrives on a couple things. One is fiber. Fiber is a key part of the equation.
And there's almost no fiber in fast food.
Right, exactly. Another is like all the colors that you see in leafy greens and like colorful vegetables. Those, if you see some food that's colorful, that basically means it's nutritious to the microbiome. So there are all these factors in food that can be helpful. So food is part of the equation, but then there's also other types of contaminants. And so certain pesticides and residues that are present on food, we know can be very disruptive to the health of the microbiome. Antibiotics, if taken in excess, can be very problematic to the microbiome. Sometimes antibiotics are necessary, but if someone is frequently taking antibiotics, that's also affecting the good bacteria that we need to be healthy. Those are variables that can also affect the microbiome.
So if somebody has taken courses of antibiotics and probably been exposed to pesticides, as most of us have, how can they know if their gut microbiome is in good shape? And if not, what can they do about it?
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways to know. One is if you have a number of symptoms that are present, then you probably have some imbalances in your microbiome. And there can be a lot of different symptoms, things like brain fog, things like fatigue, things like reflux, things like diarrhea and constipation, bloating. Like many types of GI symptoms are ultimately related to the health of the microbiome. So one way is just by thinking if you have any of those symptoms, like you might have some issues. The other thing you can do is you can do testing with the support of an integrative or functional medicine practitioner. And such a practitioner can look at many levels of many factors that influence the health of the microbiome.
And when you see an imbalance from the testing, are there things you can do to get the gut health back on track, to get that microbiome healthy again?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of kind of well-defined ways to help support the health of the microbiome. And so we think about dietary modifications. We think about sometimes supplementing enzymes to help break down food. We think about probiotics, which can help repopulate some of the good bacteria that may be missing from your gut.
And just to connect the dots again, the gut microbiome can have a big impact on weight, obesity, which we know is a risk factor for many types of cancers, as you said. And it seems that the gut microbiome itself, the health of it, the population of it, can be a relative risk factor itself for certain cancers.
Yep, exactly.
There's emerging data about that.
Absolutely. That's very true. I think, another exposure or another lifestyle factor that's really important to talk about is smoking. And so, smoking, I think many people know at this point that it is associated with increased cancer risk. And this is for a couple of reasons. One is it can lead to significant inflammation in the body. It probably has negative effects on the microbiome. It leads to something called oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is this process of essentially accelerated aging in the body. It's kind of like resting in the body. And so smoking is one of those things. Excess alcohol is another thing like that.
Oftentimes people say sitting is the new smoking. How is that the case for cancer risk?
Mm-hmm. So another thing that we know is that an active body is a healthy body. And so increasingly cancer organizations are recommending that people have at least 150 minutes of aerobic activity per week. That's at least moderate intensity. And so moderate intensity would be like a brisk walk or like a gentle run, something like that. And it's important that it happens on a fairly regular basis. Our bodies are really designed to be moving, not to be sitting in one place.
And for those who like to know, what is that biological connection between being sedentary and increased cancer risk?
So there are a couple of factors, but sitting kind of leads to a reprogramming of our body. It leads to this phenotype of something called senescence, which is essentially like senescent is being like immobile, essentially. So when your body is in a senescent state, it needs very different things than when you're active. And the things that you need when you're active lead to kind of anti-inflammatory pathways, leads to upregulation of pathways that lead to something called autophagy, which is the turnover of old cells. When you're active, that leads to increased mitochondrial function. When you're not active, when you're senescent, the reverse of all those things happens. And so all these good things that happen when you're active are not happening when you're inactive. And all those pathways can then have the downstream consequence of predisposing you to cancer and many other factors.
In terms of diet, you mentioned how an excess of the wrong macronutrients, the wrong types of carbohydrates and fats, can increase cancer risk. What about an insufficient amount of the important micronutrients and cancer risk?
Yeah, so this is something that's also relevant. And we think in the modern world that nutritional deficiencies are not that common. And in fact, they still are quite common for many reasons. One is if people have impaired microbiome function, that can lead to micronutrient deficiency.
And also, there's a difference between deficiency and insufficiency, right? Because people are looking at, deficiency in terms of so little vitamin C you have scurvy, but what about enough vitamin C that you have a healthy immune system?
Yeah, so there's a real spectrum here, and it's not just like you have enough or you don't have enough. You can have like barely enough, but you're just squeaking by, and that's not the same as like really having full resources. It's like having a battery that's 10% full versus 100% full.
And the problem with the ultra-processed diet that we're talking about, junk foods, convenience foods, is not only are the macronutrients problematic, as you said before, but there's just not enough of those micronutrients, things like essential minerals, vitamins, phytonutrients that are found in plants.
Yeah.
And they're critical.
Yeah, these are not extra. These are required for the body to function well. People may not think that things like folate and B12 and zinc and magnesium and manganese and this whole list of micronutrients, people may think that they're not important, but they're actually really crucial to fundamental processes in our body that help it run smoothly. And if you're missing one of them, then whole parts of the system can start to function improperly. Having these micronutrients is just really crucial to all of the systems in your body being able to operate at full capacity. And that's what you need for good health, and that's what you need for cancer prevention. You need a system that's operating at its best.
So basically, Dr. Handley, the things my grandmother always told me are the things that we should be doing to really minimize our cancer risk. Everything from eating healthy, not too much junk food, maintaining a good body weight, getting out and moving around, stress levels, good social connections, however we can find them, that these all are important to cancer risk and cancer outcomes.
Yep. That's a great way to summarize it.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Dr. Nate Handley, our integrative oncologist. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Dr. Monti.